Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Bill Cardilopoulos. I'm one of the co-curators of the New York Comics and Picture Story Symposium this season. This is the 367th meeting of the New York Comics and Picture Story Symposium. This is an event series that was founded over 10 years ago by Ben Ketchor as an offshoot of Occupy Wall Street and a way to create kind of free, in a way, free educational offerings in a public setting. The way that it's evolved is that what it is a weekly, essentially a weekly speaker series where every week we have a different person come and present about their work. And these are typically people who work in various fields connected to comics, visual narrative, and different kinds of text image production. This week, this particular week, I'm truly delighted that we're joined by Eunsoo Jeong, the creator, among other things, of the zine and online comic series Koreangry. And I will read a bio in a minute, but I will say that this is work that I encountered on Instagram, of course. Like, I think probably most people who know the work have encountered it. And uh, it's just something that I was immediately taken by, because on the one hand, there's this great combination of great over-the-top humor, but grounded in a kind of real righteous anger, as well as, I think, a kind of desire to kind of sometimes inform and educate, but not really from a position of superiority. Almost, it almost feels as if it's like the voice of someone who is speaking out of a sense of shared struggle, but with a really strong sense of passion. But then all of that is also rooted in just the incredible craft of the work, because if you're not familiar with the work, as you'll see tonight, it's composed entirely of these meticulously crafted miniatures, and it almost creates this like inherent tension between the sort of rapid consumability of like content on social media and the intense level of craft involved. And it also, one of the other things that I think is striking about it is that it's three-dimensional models, but there's something about the design of everything that almost makes it feel like cartooning. It has something like the proportions and characteristics of drawing in some ways too, so that Koreangry, the main character, really does look like a cartoon character, and one who might like, spring to life. But that's enough about me. But what I want to say before I introduce our speaker tonight is that Eunsoo will speak for however long she wants to speak, and afterwards we'll have Q&A. So while she's speaking, if you want, if there are any questions that occur to you, you can put them in the chat. And then as soon as she's done, either I can read those questions, or if you prefer, you can ask them, you can unmute and ask them yourself. And beyond that, if you want, you can just raise your hands and we can continue the Q&A and the conversation for as long as we want to. So now let me read the bio that I have here for tonight's speaker. Okay, here it is. Eunsoo Jeong is a Los Angeles-based artist and creator of Koreangry, a comic zine series based on her daily struggles as a Korean-American immigrant woman and an artist searching for her identity today. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Eunsoo Jeong here tonight. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Bill, for such a wonderful introduction. That is so generous and sweet and kind words for my work. I really absolutely appreciate it. And thank you for tuning in tonight. Maybe in the afternoon somewhere in California time. But I'm really happy to be here and excited to present my work. So without further ado, I'm going to share my presentation. Does everything look good? Maybe you can give me a thumbs up. Yay. All right. Immigration, translating immigration journey through comic. I named this because I wanted to kind of talk about my origin story and how it connects to the character. So, as you know, I'm Eunsoo Jeong, Los Angeles-based artist and creator. And as you can see, more or less, this is the size of a Koreangry 7-inch puppet doll armature character myself. Some people have said it looked like Asian Gumby. I also really love that because that's what I was going for. So before we start talking about my Koreangry comic series, let's dive into the quick recap of what origin story it is and purpose of origin story, context to my work. I'm sure a lot of you know the origin story is how we describe the main character, where they got their special abilities, and how they became a superhero or supervillain. That's the short, quick way to describe, I think. And it kind of tells the journey and why they turn out themselves to be the way they are. And it gives you a deeper understanding of the psychology of the characters, and it helps to like basically understand the choices that the characters make. And short term, like three purpose of a character origin story serves basically to invest in your character and to explain high stakes when they face the conflict, and lastly to explain characters current fears, flaws, or the worldview of where the character lives. That's like my understanding of the origin story is. So my origin story of Koreangry starts from 2016 when it sucked. My 2016 sucked really, really hard because it specifically had the political tension about immigration, and I had to write my year in review in view of my anger. And it was heightened fear in 2016 because specifically I was undocumented at that time. And I was suffering through a lot of night terrors. The fear of being deported was just getting heightened and heightened. And 2016 was the year where it just kind of exploded. So I started writing things down that made me angry, the fear, the good and the bad and everything. And it went like all these. And to give you context of my immigration story more, I am originally from a town called Daegu, but you may know more from a neighboring town called Busan from South Korean zombie series Train to Busan, where I grew up most of the time. And these are the questions that I have listened and asked about over 22 years of my immigration. And it was a nonstop, and it never, cease down. I always get this still today. So I wanted to start kind of going into understanding what made my immigration the way it is, the complexity of it. And I wanted to kind of dive into deeper exploration of ideas where and how I feel about this. This is kind of a like an experimental comic, like quick sketches of like how I felt about being told as a lie of my immigration. And I kind of kept living under this uncertainty and never-ending fears and triggering multiple signs and feeling of alone and shame and guilt, resentment of my family to put me in this space and place where I don't understand. I didn't originally know what undocumented meant. It wasn't until when I was graduating high school to go to college that I fully understood what it meant. I didn't have any papers, which means I couldn't my college choices were very limited, and I just kind of felt like my world has just ended. But I think it was like very hard for me to grasp the concept of what type of trauma that I was going through because I was so young, and I just didn't have time to reflect on myself and immigration journey in a way that I do now. It was just like a lot of like it was not something that I felt like I was proud of. And so this was just like a one-off comic I made about thinking about deportation. Am I gonna be deported today? Who's gonna deport me? So it's kind of like sad, but also I didn't want my story to be just sad. So the lack of representation is representation. This is a quote that I recently learned reading this book, but I think captures my feeling of how I felt when I looked around reflecting on my immigration journey. Is because I haven't seen any of undocumented Asian American in my life. Back in 2001, 22 years ago. And I think that a lot of stereotyped images of Asians at that time was the only representation that I saw and grew up learning about. People with a funny accents, or a lot of jokes that are about specific features of myself. BTS, bobas, and all this like good positive thing about Asian culture was not available at that time. So I think that I kind of grew up accepting what was like shown and given to me as part of the truth of myself, which is not true. So I started deeply think about that a lot. And when I started the comic Koreangry character, I wanted to specifically focus on those aspects of what I didn't like about myself, including my immigration journey. So in a way, I wanted to take my origin story into something that is more powerful, which is owning my story and narrative to turn into something more, I guess, something that I can be proud of. And in a process of doing so, I had to learn why is my immigration cannot be something that I could just naturally be proud of. And this is like the whole journey of my Korean comic of kind of researching and connecting and learning and understanding of the whole complexity of this timeline that I'm living in. So yeah, and as you can see, undo and rewrite those narratives that I believe were untrue. And I wanted to rewrite that with the more funny looking character that I kind of really relate myself to. So when I figured out my Koreangry character, I did explore a lot of different shapes. I always had this natural like swoop line that I was highly I didn't really like that feature of myself either. It's called Widow's Peak. And I thought that if I could something that I don't like about myself into something that is just like up as like a character, maybe I don't know, maybe I don't need to really hate that part of myself. And I just wanted to accentuate, over exaggerate that character some part that I didn't like about. So I did a lot more exploration about that and just kind of play with the shape and how I struggle with this like massive hair. So that kind of joke came from that with the shape play. What my sketches look like today, yeah, this is the more recent version of my sketches. I do more writing than traditional storyboarding. For me, I think I spend most times to figure out more dynamic poses and just the feeling of how I want to tell the story for each comic. I haven't done any long narrative comics, but usually the more control of the panel sizes helps me to like condense and edit my panels. And I use a lot of post-it notes to just kind of edit and flip-flop. And I'm not attached to any of the panels at this point because I feel like sometimes being attached to one idea kind of limits you to have more possibility of how to tell the story. So I try to just be more flowy and like explore whether if the order of my panels make more sense, or if it doesn't, would it be more confusing, or does it sound a little bit better? So I play a lot with this stage. The process include writing stories, notes, and making props or the sets that are related to the specific to the storytelling. If it's like a very specific props that I'm making a fun of or making that I'm interacting with, I definitely have to create that props or sets. And I just kind of prop them in a set and position her in different positions and take multiple pictures to see if I feel like do I like this? Do I not like this? So it's like a lot of like experimenting. I have started doing more storyboarding, kind of a rough idea of a positioning of the character. It does help a lot for clarity for sure. But by this time, I already have my writings down. By this time, I already have like what I want for each panel. This is like a quick process of puppet making, and anybody can download this PDF of how I made about this puppet. It's like with a bunch of mixed materials as wires and wrapped around with a string and dipped it in like a Liquitex or balloon rubber liquid that gives a flexibility and it works like a skin. I chose to tell my story through this medium because I felt like my stories have a lot of trauma and sometimes kind of heavy topics. And I didn't want my style to be that. It's just my personal choice to kind of be more approachable and maybe even like cute and adorable. And it can be very like snarky. The message can be very snarky and zappy, but I wanted the initial representation to be more kind of fun, approachable, and more comfortable with myself. If anything, I want to tell the story the way I want to tell it, which was like heavily influenced by like Wallace and Gromit kind of a homey vibe. And I like that it's not clean. I like that it's more little, it allows more mistakes to be made. And I think that's just the way I like to work. So these are like the examples of the comics as Bill like shared earlier that I build all the props and put it in a set. This comic specifically was about how to protect yourself as an immigrant, as a person in the United States when ICE comes. ICE are the immigration, customs, and enforcement like agents that can just come and kind of pretty much deport you. And I was really traumatic. I was really traumatized by a whole concept of this group, which just made after 2001 9/11. It's really not that long of a history that they have made. But I felt like a lot of us don't really know that there are rights that we attain as a person that we can protect ourselves from. So I wanted to create something that can be helpful. So I made a comic about that when they come, what you can do. And I made it eventually as a one-page zine where you can fold and hand it out, download, share. Made it a Spanish version as well, so it can be helpful. These are the other comic examples that I have in the past. The first one is about Dear My Fellow Korean Americans, why the Black Lives Matter to us. And I wrote a sincere letter for why this movement mattered to our community with the Black and Korean community tension from 92 riots in LA. I wanted to kind of give a historical context of why we are here and how we can be part of this movement. I get a lot of pushback from my comics from Korean Americans, believe it or not. It's because it's like, you know, I'm calling out certain parts of our culture that it's not positive. So my comics can kind of stir up a lot of you know, drama in that way, but I think I have understood that that's just an okay thing too. Sometimes my comic can be interpreted as something that I didn't plan to, but it's just the nature of artwork is just that. So these are some of the informative comics I've done. How to not to be a bystander, from very, very helpful from the workshop I took. So that was that. These are AIPI comics that I did. The comic in this side is like just kind of like my feeling of what whenever I hear like racist slurs on the streets that I personally have experienced, my reaction to that isn't sometimes as like quick or as like snappy, or sometimes I have a hard time like talking back. And I started to like think about why am I the way I am, and it was all because the way that I grew up to be more, you know, docile, obedient, kind of good daughter, kind of played a lot in my mind to not to make a fuss about it. And so this was just kind of like show my complex like thinking when that happened. It's not because I'm not angry, or it's not because I didn't want to, like, it's not because I didn't hear what was just said. It's just because all this like characteristics thing that I have grown up in my culture that is hard time for me to like talk back. So these are more concepts of like very Asian specific experiences that I didn't understand until I made the comic. I understood it. So it's been mostly like that. I'm also educating and learning a lot about myself and my culture when I make these comics. So sometimes I make mistakes, and that's just part of the life. And when I get feedback, and I just sometimes edit and all that afterwards too. Speaking of haters gonna hate, not everyone will respond to your work. I'm realizing that, including family members and friends. A lot of family members are uncomfortable with what I had to say about my experience. And it's not something that is easy. Like, aside from your craftsmanship and artwork, I think how you respond to your work is another skill set that I learned to have. It's just not like it doesn't really help you to like be productive, and it really can put you down with your creative outlet. So it's something to keep in your mind, that everyone's going to have some kind of haters, whether it's online or not, and you just have to kind of like find a way to protect yourself from that. It's okay to take risks, but always remember your safety, well-being comes first. And some fans can have ulterior motives. Sometimes people may entitled to give you opinions and advice on how you do your work just because they've been loving your work, and you don't have to listen to that. And I learned how to tools like block, delete, and report. I don't even feel bad anymore. I'm kind of like treating it like most likely like my mind from my comic has been more like a business in some ways. I have a right to refuse anybody's services. So I think of it like that. How to keep going? It's just also the reminder to be kinder to yourself. It's okay to rest, and don't lose your humor. I feel like this is the big one. Not losing your humor, because sometimes the personal experience, immigration journey, things like that can be very intense. So I take a lot of break, and sometimes I just feel like if I can't figure out, then I just kind of give up on the comic. It's okay to just give up and quit in certain parts of the comic, I think, for the bigger storytelling later on. And find your people, having plan B, C, D, listen to your gut feeling, invest in yourself, and learn to advocate. And lastly, and this is a summary of my presentation, purpose. Remember, the origin story serves three purposes: to invest in your characters, to explain high stakes when they face conflict, to explain characters' current fears, flaw, worldview. And your story is yours. It is your truth. No one gets to decide or judge when to tell your story. And lastly, this is another quote I really feel like it's important to remember when you make a comic about immigration or specific stories or representation that is lacking. The act of writing about marginalized experiences and embodied experience is an act of resistance and unlearning and decolonizing. So that has been my presentation. Thank you. I'm gonna stop share.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. That was such a wonderful presentation, and it raises about for me like a million questions. And one of the things actually, when you were let me remove the spotlight here. When you were summarizing, actually, you got to the end, and in a way, you kind of, reminded us of where you started talking about origin stories. And it's kind of like, it almost seemed like you have two origin stories here, and one is like your origin story, but also the origin story of the Koreangry project. And in a way, it's like the character sort of is you and isn't you at the same time. Have you ever been like, I mean, how can I put it? Like, in a way, like that character who represents you is a sort of kind of exaggerated version of you in some ways, or is a character who's designed to be able to like embody your opinions in a really like forceful way that, as you were saying, like maybe in the moment you don't express. Um, have you ever been tempted to do something without that character that's maybe closer to your actual experience, or alternatively is maybe just completely fictional?
Well, that's a really good question. I think about this a lot. I think that I really wanted a character where I didn't have to explain why I was so angry from the beginning because I wasn't so used to expressing my emotion for such a long time. And that it became a character where at the point where I want to be like this in real life. Um, and because when I make comic, I just think about a lot of like what I want to say. I write down, I plan ahead what I say, but in real life, it's not like that. So sometimes when like racist things that happens to me in my life, I feel like I think about, oh my God, what would my character say in this situation in real life? And I kind of got a lot more confidence thinking in that way too, because I think that it helps me to train my thinking. I would do this in my comic, but why can't I do this in real life? So I have definitely gotten a lot more confidence telling my story and being this character. And I still want to be this character, but I am 100% not. I think about I think it is about 80% me and there's 20% that is not true. That wishful thinking and to be, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very specific thing. I mean, I think it's a very appealing type of character who just has like no filter
Yeah.
and no fear, you know. I mean, I think, like when I was in college, I don't know if you ever saw Tank Girl, for example, and it was this
Yeah,
similar
tech girl.
type of character where it's just like totally kick ass. And in a way, you could almost make any story by just putting Tank Girl in that story, and just the way they would respond to things would sort of create the story. There's one question in the chat I'll ask in a moment. I actually wanted to ask one more completely different question, which is totally formal. Because one thing that I know is that you've done zines, and you showed us some images of those zines. I mainly know your work through your Instagram account. And one thing that I thought was interesting is that when you're planning a zine, you're really putting a lot of thinking into the layout of the panels, and some of the layouts that you were, thumbnailing in your sketchbook, even just the small images that I saw, I could see were very complex page layouts, and sometimes very dense. But then on Instagram, you're limited to this very, very specific format where it's always the most you can do is like 10 same size squares or 10 same sized rectangles. And I was wondering too, if that's a tension for you, if, because I think so much of your audience comes from Instagram, but you clearly also have this interest in different kinds of page layouts, or, thinking about format as part of your expression. So how does that work for you? I mean, when you make zines, are you readapting things that you've already posted to Instagram to a different format? Do you create original material just for the zines? I was wondering if you could talk about the relationship between the comics page in print and then the presentational format of Instagram.
Yeah, well, my background, I have no comic background. I really don't know much about anything when I first started. And it was like a limited to 4 panels on Instagram. So I could only do 4 panels, which was, I think, was really great way to get me started. And as the time went by, like you say, like I started to realize that I'm limited to like 4 square panels, but now we can do like different sizes. And as the time went on, I adapted that type of like sizes and things too with the Instagram. And I realized what works in Instagram doesn't always work in the print format of reading. So in very first like zines, it was a lot more experimental. I'm trying to figure out whether this works in this or not. And definitely not everything on the zine is in the social media at all. Sometimes it becomes like more intimate experience on the zine. So I tend to make sure that that part is still the same. And I do have to rearrange a lot of layouts and things like that when I were to translate back to the zine, which gave me a lot of great anxiety and fear. And I used to cry every time I make zine because out of frustration and anxiousness. But it has gotten better. And I just finished my, a couple months ago was my 11th zine of since starting 2016. So I'm getting faster. I'm getting my routines down, having my panels and things like that. So I learn a lot as I go, but it's definitely not the same experience from this scrolling effect than actually opening and reading through panels. So I have to think about that a lot.
There are a couple of questions in the chat, so I want to make sure to read those too. The first one is from Ben Fraser, who writes, "Thanks for the talk, Eunsoo. I'm enjoying being introduced to your comics. I saw on Instagram an art exchange with at arcade.28 you participated in, and the sculpture of the figure standing on books and playing a Pac-Man video game console I thought was phenomenal. Can you talk about that art exchange, or even how you, or that specific sculpture, or even how you see comics connecting with other media in your work?" Okay, that's a lot. I haven't seen this image, but you must know exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah, it's exactly. Yeah, he's one of my good friend, Tim. We had a artist group of our friends group for 10 years. We did the Secret Santa art exchange, and we chose random words. We voted on it and made an artwork to gift to each other. And one of that theme was just kind of thinking about the artist friend. I don't think there was any theme for it at the time. I think there was like what you think of that friend, make something that when you think of that friend. And for some reason I thought of my friend Tim with a Pac-Man and in all the little sketchbooks where we were all sketching all the time, so I made a miniature version of it, and then it came about. I use a lot of mixed media and a lot of found objects. I do a lot of hand materials because I feel like it's so missing in today's world, and it gives me great joy to be more flexible and to be allowed to make mistakes a lot on this sense. So I think a lot of my sculptures are not perfect. And honestly, whenever I go travel, people are like so intrigued to touch because I think something about us seeing things in three-dimensional format that are just so intriguing and so captivating. And I love that experience and exchange. And it becomes more like easy to talk about my work in that way because I'm more comfortable with it. People can touch, and honestly if people drop it and break it, for me it's not a big deal because it's like that's just a part of the story. It has a crack now, it has a story of being cracked and all that. So that's my art type of artwork.
No, I remember you were in 2022, you were at the Mocha Festival, and I guess this is probably what you do when you go to other festivals as well. You had brought like one of your sets, like one of your
Yeah.
dioramas, and you had the 7-inch Koreangry armature there. And it was crazy because it really felt like seeing a celebrity or at least seeing a cartoon character, because it's like, I mean, there are other artists who draw the same character all the time, but it's like, okay, you can look at a drawing, you can look at a printed drawing, but it was just kind of like, oh yeah, it almost felt like seeing a celebrity where it's like, I see them on a flat screen all the time, but oh my God, here it is in 3 dimensions, so that was a really fun moment for me. And I'm sure other people have that experience with your character too.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because some people might think that, oh, you're not drawing, you're just positioning this character, so you're kind of being smart and clever way. I have gotten that kind of comments too, but I don't think a lot of people know that like I built this puppet probably 17 times because it breaks a lot, and it's a similar feeling of a comic artist, of a repetitive act of like making things that looks the same. So I feel like, yes, it's true, I'm not drawing it all the time, but I am continuously make the consistent look of this model every and has its own like downside of doing this type of comic too.
Well, that's a perfect segue to another question here in the chat from Jeanette Rowan, and basically asking, because you mentioned that you had been making these drawings of this character that had certain characteristics like the widow's peak and the big swoopy hair, and when you committed to making the zines and the comics, Jeanette wants to know, how did you get the idea to make the character a 3D one instead of just doing drawn comics? Because you showed, for example, that experimental comic that you had done. So clearly you were, you were drawing a lot, but what made you take the leap to doing this as a 3D project?
I think I've always been gravitated toward to like really look at Wallace and Gromit because I grew up watching that claymation when I was little in Korea. And so it's kind of gave me like some sort of a fuzzy, like a comfortable feeling. And I feel I'm not a strongest drawer, but I feel more confident in my craftsmanship in that way. And so I thought that if I were to tell my genuine, authentic story of myself, I think I wanted to tell it in a way that I feel most comfortable and happy with the look of it. So for me, making the look of what it feels true to me was the real reason why I made it to the 3D like armature look of my character, because I just felt that's just so right. And I don't know if anybody can relate to this, but there are moments where you just do variation of different things, and there's a moment where this just feels right. And I think that's when I made it, and three-dimensionally, that's when I felt this is just perfect. And because I didn't have any skill set, it was so awful. It was so faulty. It was so awful. And I reached out to some random stranger who I ran into, who happened to be working at Robot Chicken, like professional stop motion puppet maker. And I just didn't have any relationship with this person, but I just asked them to help me. And I was so grateful that she helped me with this whole process, and it's all in PDF if you're interested. But it basically, she kind of broke it down and show how to do it professionally. And because I had so much like desire to make this happen, I just kind of like did it multiple times. And every time I make it, it feels better, and it feels more like true to me. So I just really wanted to do that in that form.
One of the things that I always am impressed by is just how much specific detail you put into the backgrounds, so it's not just the character, but it's like if the character has a bookshelf behind her, it's like they're not just random books. It's almost like, I don't know, I'm guessing you spend a lot of time like finding images and printing them out at the right
Yeah.
proportion, making little tiny books with like the right lettering on the spine or the right image on the cover and everything like that. I mean, what is that, what is that part of the process like for you? Is that just a kind of going into a pleasurable sort of craft and building sort of mode?
Yeah, I think it's really therapeutic for me to make small things. And I think that's part of why I did it this way, because some of the stories is really like triggering. And honestly, like I still cry at some of the topics, not just because of subject matter. It's just I'm reliving some of the traumatic moments sometimes. So in order for me to like go through that feeling, I feel like I had to find something that is like therapeutic at some point. So I put on YouTube and I kind of do this and just crying and just making it. But it's funny enough, every time and once I finish that comic, I like feel better. It's almost like I'm compartmentalizing my experience. Once that comic is done, I can move on from that experience and I can really talk about it. And it's been a lot of learning experience from that. And I feel like I've been grown a lot from the first time I started comic, which was just anger, the cuss words and anger, just spewing the hate that I received back in my comic. But now I feel like it has became like really understanding where this anger is truly coming from and kind of dissecting it in a way that like I can absorb it and I'm making a sense of it. and I'm telling the story in my way. So it has definitely changed that route for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, in a way, it's kind of like what's interesting too is it sounds like with the issues that you bring up, you probably get different responses from different audiences, and I mean, there are some people who just don't want to hear at all what you have to say because they're not even open to acknowledging racism, let alone possibly their own. Then of course, I'm sure there are people who just are people who receive everything with in a good way, like they believe what you're saying, they support you. And I'm also too interested in, the things that you had to say about the contact and responses you've had even from the Korean and Korean American community. Because, I mean, I don't experience racism, but I do belong to an ethnic community myself. I mean, the Greek American community. And the truth is, like, I also know that pressure to assimilate in certain ways. And I also know too that like there are aspects of ethnic identity groups in the United States that are not attractive. I mean, there is racism within ethnic groups, even even ethnic, as you were saying, even racial groups that experience racism can feel have express
Yeah,
racist
yeah.
feelings and idea. I mean, it's not exclusive. And sometimes I feel like myself, like I haven't like taken on the responsibility of speaking to my community. I just, live in New York, but
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
kind of wondering how you sort of think about, who you're talking to when you're making these comics and maybe where you feel like you've had the most impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been very polarizing at the beginning. A lot of people don't really wanted to hear like me talking about things that happen in my community. I think a lot of pushbacks are it's like it's kind of funny because even when during pandemic I whenever I talk about some things that I feel like we wish we weren't like this in our community, it just I get a lot of like, oh, if you're not with us then you're not with us, like kind of a mentality is either you or like us or not kind of a mentality. And I kind of wanted to talk about why is it like that, like so part of I think a lot of comics come from my desire to be better, not just for myself but our community and like for the next generation, if that's possible. Like I feel like it's like the hopeness, like the hopeful of like I want to do something so someone like me won't be feeling the same way I did when I was growing up. And I think the whole part of me like speaking out about undocumented Asian identity is to just kind of normalize that the undocumented immigration is not only subjected to like Hispanics and Latinos as a lot of people believe. And I wanted to just speak on about that. And I try to like do more events outside of California or New York because I noticed that like bigger cities, metropolitan cities have better understanding of this context. But if I were to go travel middle of nowhere, sometimes I'm the only one who is Asian person at tabling, and I feel like it makes me feel really nervous to be in those spaces. But at the same time, I would have one or two person who would come to me and really, really like share their experience of what it is like to live there as a person who is a person of a color, and it makes me want to do that more because it gives me a reason to do it more. It is exactly why I do my work the way I do, and has been not always been positive. Honestly, it's a lot draining too. So I'm trying to like balance and learning about what is making me happy and what I feel like I should do versus like what do I feel good naturally and organically. I don't need to like make people to believe what I have to say is the truth. I just have to like learn that and embrace it. And if it's not your cup of tea, that's fine. But I'm just gonna keep doing my storytelling in my own way. And if people can connect, that's like really great. But if not, it's no big deal. And I try to understand in my mind. And surprisingly, even though I'm an Asian and Korean American and woman, the anger part of it, it's so like universal. Like I would had so many different people. I'm not you, I'm not this character, but somehow I really relate to this feeling of it. And it makes me feel like a lot of us are alike, um in a human feelings, emotional way, in some,
Yeah.
because we share a lot of values. I believe we share a lot of values. So I feel like I can tell the story without having too heavy-handed. And this is the Korean American comic, so you have to understand as a Korean perspective. I don't really feel like that at all,
Yeah,
and it
right.
has let me be. Yeah,
Oh no, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say, yeah, there is something that is for, I think for many people, universal, just about the experience of feeling like, the systems around you don't really accommodate your full expression of who you are, and among other things, so it speaks to that, even if you're not an undocumented Korean immigrant or something like that.
right, right.
Mhm. I want to ask you one other question. We were chatting earlier because I don't know a lot about what you do professionally, and you were telling me that you have a day job. You work in an animation studio, and one of the things that I really admire about your project with Koreangry is that you seem to have resist. Speaking of structures trying to pressure us to do things, you seem to have resisted the urge to excessively monetize this project. I think a lot of people would be like, okay, now how do I turn this into, like, how do I pitch this to Adult Swim or something, and I mean, maybe you have, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I also feel like there's something that's so kind of like pure and raw about the project, that it also makes me wonder if it could survive that kind of translation. I'm just wondering, and then, but at the same time, you mentioned Wallace and Gromit, and you're building all these models, and it's kind of like, I'd be interested to see what it looked like if Koreangry started like moving around and talking. I mean, how do you think about that stuff?
I mean, it's always my dream to see it come alive, and but I know the whole pure labor of a stop motion animation, and I just know that that's not me. I just think that I think I had to be honest with my skill set and where I am, what I want to do. I really have to be honest about that. And yes, it's not, it doesn't generate a huge income or anything, but I do think that it's kind of nice to have that as a motive for me, because I want it to be the reason I chose a zine was is because it's so accessible to everyone. I didn't want it to be like fancy like thing that only person like who has money can afford to have, things like that. I really didn't want it to feel like that with my work. So I have it a lot. I donate a lot of my zines, and I like do a lot of volunteers to talk about my work and teach. If it's like educational, I totally have it like for available and grab, and that's just the way I want it to be for now. Maybe I'll change my mind sometime, but it just feels more me. And I like it in my pace, because more, I feel like I will have less control of my freedom of how I want to do this once this becomes a job. And because I work at the job as a creative field, I just want this to be least like feeling like a work, because it's just what gave me
Yeah.
the journey. Like I feel like it's a very personal project for me. It grows with my timeline. It's sort of like a social experiment in some ways, because I'm documenting my growth and my becoming like, adult, and like whole process of me transitioning from my late 20s to 30s, and all in my comic. So it's like definitely a passion project for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you go, you mentioned, I mean, one of the things that you're also very open about, and I think this is good, is sort of this idea that you are kind of tracking in a way your own development, and because I think there's also, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I think there are a lot of people who are very quick sometimes to try and go online and put themselves forwards as experts of one kind or another, and whereas I think, it's hard to put my finger on, but there's something about the way you express this stuff where it's almost like I'm sharing what I've learned so far. Like, and I feel like you maintain that tone without giving into the urge to like be pedantic or like you are the authority and everyone should listen to you because it's you. Maybe some of it is because it's just coming from a puppet and it's not a good person. So that's one
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
But also too, so I'm kind of wondering how you feel about even assuming a position of authority, and also too how you feel. I mean, you say you go back and you can read it and it's like you're tracking your development, and to the extent that you're kind of putting out ideas, are there any works that maybe you go back and you're like, oh, I'm a little uncomfortable with what I said here, and maybe I don't want this one on my Instagram anymore? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the shortcomings are so like big part of it. I think a lot of things changed within like 2016 till like I've been doing it for like 7 years. So a lot of terminology has changed. A lot of my view on sexualities has changed over the years. And I make so many mistakes over the line, but I usually try not to delete any because that's just part of especially on social media, like it's part of like the time period, and it did. So there are comics that it didn't age well at all, and then people actually comment on it, this didn't age at well. And it's true, it is true, but I feel like you kind of have to move beyond that because I'm not trying to make a one perfect post. I'm not trying to be like a viral post and get all followers in. It's just like my timeline, and I'm just slowly going along, and I believe that like if I will get better slowly but surely if I keep continue to do my own pace. And that's, I think that's why it has been going on for such a long time for me too, because if I were to just keep focusing on monetizing, trying to do more than what I can do, I don't think I would have this long of energy to keep doing what I'm doing. So
Yeah. No, I mean, that's really wise. I mean, I think, there are a lot of things that people are encouraged to do with their creative work that are framed as being kind of strategically intelligent things to do, but that actually can sort of kill the little thing that keeps it alive for
yeah.
them creatively, and there's a lot. Again, that's another one of those pressures that people are under. So I think that makes perfect sense. That, I mean, it sounds like all the choices you've made are about keeping it as a personal project where it's alive enough that in a way you can grow within it and through it by making it. And I think that's great. I mean, that's what an art project is. We could keep going a little bit more. I want to see though. I feel like I mean, I've had so many questions since your presentation. Oh, great. Here's one from Michael K. Michael, do you want to read this out loud or should I read it?
If you could read it, my microphone is not working too well.
No sweat. So here's a question from Michael K. It's great that you found a creative process with your art that can facilitate with healing the traumas that you experienced. I wonder if there is a way that your work can reach more people that can help heal their traumas by helping them create art. Okay, so I guess how would you respond to that, Eunsoo? How your work can sort of help people, maybe even empower them or give them a model for using their art to deal with traumas?
Yeah, I actually had a lot of people reaching out about this, and I think reading my comic itself, I have heard it had helped them somehow, because just to see like myself being so vulnerable gave them more confidence to try it out, to tell their story on their way. I some of the class I took, the teacher actually starts their warm-up exercise for their class to create their version of a Koreangry. No questions asked, like what would you look like, an angry version of yourself? And that kind of, I think I just learned that someone does that. So it was like, wow, that's awesome. The experience, I think what you can do practically is to just to kind of start with, for me, to write down what makes you feel the way you do, and kind of start making your own map of like what had happened and how did you feel about it, and where are you going to do something about it, and ever since you did something about it, did anything change? That's a quick simple storyline I try to tell, to have a practice, to start with something happened, how did you feel about it, um, would you do anything about it to change, and ever since that changed, was there any other new feeling or, you know, what's changed on your character. And that's like a quick change, I think, exercise and practices to tell the storyline and just kind of condense the feelings and all that. I think it's really hard to really relive the traumatic experience or events. So it's only if you feel like you're ready. I don't want people to rush and feel like they have to dive in just because I want to feel better. I feel like everyone has their own timeline and everyone has their own skills and comfortable time. So I think it's really up to each individual's comfort.
No, that's great. That's a great answer. And yeah, I mean, that's a wonderful story structure for dealing with that stuff. And I love that idea too of someone who's just make the angry version of yourself. I mean, it's like basically like Hulk out, you know. Is there anyone else who's with us now who hasn't asked a question, but maybe has something on their mind that they are interested in asking? You can maybe just put your virtual hand up or put it in the chat. Just want to make sure everybody has a chance to ask a question if they have one. Okay, doesn't seem like it, so that's fine. So one thing I'll ask too, you mentioned you hadn't really done any long form narratives. Is that something that you are interested in, either with the Koreangry character or with a different character?
Yes, I really want to try a long form, but I think the long form would take a lot of planning ahead, and a lot of like figuring out how I can practically really do it, building a sets and whatnot. So that's something that I'm thinking in mind, but probably a long-term project that will need a lot of planning. But
Yeah.
I would love to do it someday.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also, I mean, for me personally, I think, you know, I would love to see even just like, you know, instead of just going right from 10 panels to like a 300-page graphic novel, I mean, even like an 8-page story and, you know, with your approach would be really pleasurable to read. I'm also wondering too, if you've ever, you know, how much you've, you know, you mentioned you went into this really with no background in comics. You started out with Wallace and Gromit and thinking in terms of stop motion animation. I'm wondering if you've seen other things along these lines, whether digital or practical. I'm thinking, for example, of like some stuff Phoebe Gleckner has done with dolls and dioramas, or in digital form, Julian Glander's work. I don't know if you've seen any of that. Fantagraphics did a book, but his stuff's all 3D models, but it's like 4 or 8-page stories or anything. Is there anything like that that you found that you connected with, or that you see is connected to your practice in any way?
Oh, I have not heard of these artists, and I would love
Okay.
to write to check it
Okay,
out.
I'll send an email with some names.
So
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Okay. Well, I think that's it for us tonight then. And all I want to do is just first of all thank Eunsoo again for being here with us tonight. And then also to remind everyone that this is of course a weekly speaker series, and next week we'll have Kevin Hazenga here talking about his work. So you can register for that online at our website, in the same way you registered for this one. And once again, please thank me in, please join me, please don't thank me, please join me in thanking Eunsoo for being here tonight. Thank you, Eunsoo, that was excellent.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much for everyone.
All right, have a great night, everyone. Bye-bye.